Good morning. Today I'm in Lydford in Devon on the western edge of Dartmoor. Lydford today is a fairly sedate, not to say sleepy little village, but in Anglo-Saxon times it was one of the most important towns in the southwest of England, and it's also full of interesting things. So let's have a wander around and have a look. So I'm going to start this wander about halfway down the high street of Lydford. I guess the first question to talk about or to answer is, why did Lydford become such an important town in the Anglo-Saxon period? And the reason for that is that in the 9th century, I'm just going to let this car go past, have a quick look at that building there is what's called the Old Chapel. Now a private residence, very nice. The reason that Lydford became such an important town in the Anglo-Saxon period is because in the 9th century, Alfred the Great, as part of his campaign and defences against the Vikings, decided to build a series of fortified towns across Wessex. And in Devon, he built 4 of these fortified towns, or burhs as they were called, and Lydford was one of them. And we're just going to go into this field here because we can see what remains of some of the defences. You can see those earth banks where the sheep are grazing. Just going to close the gate behind me so the sheep don't go out. So as you can see here, we've got some raised banks of earth, and these surrounded the whole of the town, the whole of the burh. And on top of these there would have been a wooden palisade with some watchtowers, I guess. And this was the defence against the Viking invaders. Obviously the wooden palisades are all long vanished now, but a lot of the earthworks still remain around the town. Hello sheep, I come in peace. It gives you a reasonably good idea of how substantial these defences were. I'm just going to dig it out, the Buildings of England book, because it's got quite a useful plan in it of what the defences look like. Trying to do a balancing act here. So that, actually let me turn it around. So that is what that's what the town defences look like. And the other thing you can see there, right down that road, right down the middle, that's the high street that we just walked down. Okay, so in 997, the Vikings actually did come to Lydford and attacked. And I'm going to read you, this is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Everyman Library edition, and I'm going to read you the entry for the year 997, and it says, in this year the host, that's to say the Vikings, went round Devonshire into the mouth of the Severn, and there harried both in Cornwall, Wales and Devon, and landed at Watchet. They wrought great havoc by burning and killing people, and then went back round Land's End to the south side and entered the estuary of the Tamar, and so up it until they came to Lydford, i.e. here. There they burned and slew everything they met, and burnt to the ground Aldwulf's Abbey Church at Tavistock, carrying off an indescribable amount of plunder with them to the ships. So, in other words, Lydford was attacked by the Vikings in 997, and the defences were breached. Something whether the town was razed to the ground or not. I have read somewhere that even through this period, even through that event, there wasn't much of an interruption to the production of coins from the town's mints, because by this time Lydford was also the site of a royal mint, so maybe it wasn't as bad as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle said, or maybe it was easily something that was easily recovered from, I don't know. Okay, so we're going to go back onto the high street and continue walking through the town to the castle. If you remember that map or that plan that I showed you a few minutes ago, you can get an idea by walking down this high street that I'm just going to stop talking while this van goes past. You can get an idea of the current that the current street plan is really very little different from the Anglo-Saxon one. You've still got this long main street through the middle of the town, or village as it is now, with various sort of side streets and passageways off of it. That's pretty much the same as it was in Anglo-Saxon times. So really, Lydford is, in terms of its layout, has changed very little. So we're just coming up to the village pub now, the Castle Inn. You can just see the Church of St Petroc straight ahead, or just over to the right, and there on our right is Lydford Castle. Although there was an earlier, oops, let me get that gate. Oh, I'm fighting with the gate here. That's the church. We'll have a look at that a bit later. Yeah, so this was allegedly, I think one historian has said, this is the first example of a purpose-built jail in England. Now there was an earlier castle on the site built in the 12th century, but this structure that we can see today is late 13th century and was constructed at the direction of Richard, the Earl of Cornwall. And it was built to house prisoners that broke both the forest laws of Dartmoor and also what are called the stannery laws. And the stannery laws, relate to tin mining, which was a big activity in these parts back in the day, back in the High Middle Ages. And it also housed the courtroom as well. So let's have a wander up. So tin mining on Dartmoor actually goes back to pre-Roman times, but it became pretty big business in the medieval period. And in 1201, King John granted a royal charter that sort of formalised the so-called stannery laws that had been kind of custom and practice for centuries. And stannery, the word stannery literally means tin mine, and is derived from the medieval Latin word stannaria or stannaria, I'm not sure which. So let's have a look inside. Now, that down there was the actual prison, or the cell I should say. I think it was one big cell, I'm not 100% sure. And there was another floor up here where I'm standing, which was where the sort of courtroom and offices were. So let's just have a look. So as you can see, there's no roof these days, but it's a pretty solid building. Let's have a walk up here as well. As you can see, the outer walls are pretty well preserved in a way. Now in 1305, another royal charter was granted. This one was from Edward I, which established a network of stannery towns where tin was brought to be assessed, coined and sold by the tin miners, or as they were known, the tinners. I'm just going to walk back down now. And Lydford was the most important of the stannery towns. As it was home to the court and the prison. Justice in this period was rough, and I'm just going to walk around the outside to give you the full picture of the castle. Yeah, justice in this time was pretty rough and ready, shall we say. And what was known as Lydford Law had an especial reputation for cruelty. Because the court was very much under the control of the tinners. Try and zoom out a bit. No, it can't zoom out. Yeah, the court. So, a 17th century poet named William Browne, who was born not far from here in the town of Tavistock, wrote a poem called A Lydford Journey, and one of the some of the lines in that I'm just going to read. He says, "I've oft heard of Lydford Law, how in the morn they hang and draw, and sit in judgment after. At first I wondered at it much, but since I find the reason such, as it deserves no laughter." So in other words, carry out the sentence before you've actually had the trial. That seems to have been fairly common around here. And in 1510, a Devon MP called Richard Strode fell foul of Lydford Law and the tinners. Now he was concerned about the mining debris that was making Devon's rivers unnavigable, and he was going to bring a bill to Parliament. Let's just have there's a nice view of the church here, there we go. He was going to bring a bill to Parliament to regulate the tinners, and Strode himself was a tinner. But one of the other prominent tinners took him to the stannery court, and Strode was fined £160, which I guess was quite a lot in those days. He refused to pay, and he was imprisoned in Lydford Castle. Let's walk down the hill a little bit. He was imprisoned in Lydford Castle, locked in leg irons and fed on bread and water. He was there. His stay lasted for about 3 weeks, and afterwards he described the jail as one of the most contagious and detestable places within this realm. So there you go. Going to walk down here now. As you can see, there are some more. Can you see those banks, earth banks there? That's some more of the Saxon defences, and over there as well. So there's a fair bit that still remains. Here because there's something out on the road that I want to show you. Yeah, let's go this way. Well, we're going to have a look at the site where the first Norman castle was, which was, I think it was built quite soon after the invasion, after 1066. There's some more sheep that we're going to scare. And up ahead, if you can see that earth bank up ahead, that's actually the motte, or the hill on which the Norman castle was built. I think it was a wooden structure, and there certainly isn't anything of it that remains today. But the Normans actually built on the pre-existing Saxon defences to build their defensive earthwork. Sheep running away. Hope that ram isn't going to butt me. No, they've gone. Okay, so here you can see the ditch there that the Normans built, and that's the motte. And on top of that there was a wooden, I suppose you'd really call it a fort rather than castle. Let's walk round and go up the top there. And actually down here, so where we are here, we're on the edge of Lydford, and down there is what's known as Lydford Gorge, and that's where the river Lyd runs through. You might be able to hear the water. I'm not going to go down there today, but I might do another film about that. So that's where the Vikings would have come up that river when they did that attack in 997. Let's walk up here. I mean, I always wonder would the Vikings have sort of come up when they attacked these places? Would they have come up making tons of noise, like kind of proto death metal sounds, banging their shields and stuff like that, or would they have been silent? I don't know. But anyway, so here we are on the top of what was the motte of the Norman castle, and there's the church again, and there's the sheep. Right, so now we're going to go to the church. So I'm going to turn this off and go over there. Before we go inside the church, I just want to walk over here to show you a memorial that was erected by, I'm not sure whether it was the town council or the county council, to commemorate the 1000th year anniversary of the Viking attack on Lydford. It's just over here. There it is. I think that says Ludenford, which I guess is what it was called in Anglo-Saxon times. Oh no, Lydford. So yeah, this was put up in 1997 to commemorate the 1000th year anniversary of the Viking attack and pillaging. So there we go. let's go and have a look around the church. Actually, the other thing I was going to mention while I think of it is that until about 1987, Lydford was the largest parish in England because it included a large part of, I think about half of Dartmoor and all of Dartmoor Forest, which meant it, in terms of parishes, it was absolutely huge. What that meant was that anybody that died within the parish had to be brought to Lydford to be buried. And there was I guess a set of interconnecting routes across the moor called the Lich Way, along which the bodies were carried for burial. And lich being the Old English word for corpse. Right, let's go inside. So I'm just going into the churchyard now. This is the Church of St Petroc, who was according to legend, a British prince who became a priest and ministered to the people of Dartmoor, which is the old kingdom that comprised what's now Devon and Cornwall. Most of what we see on the church now is 14th and 15th century, but the older parts date from the 13th century. There was an earlier church on this site, a Saxon church, which has obviously been lost, and I think there's evidence of even earlier chapel, which possibly dates back to the time of Petroc, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Let's just have a quick look around the churchyard and then we'll walk around the church before we go inside. So here we've got a wheelwright stone, stone that's used for shaping and setting the metal rims on cartwheels, obviously not in use now. We've got a lovely old wall here covered in moss. We've got some daffodils swaying in the wind. There's something about these old walls covered in moss and plants that I really like. That's so soft. It's kind of ancient and yet living at the same time, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't. So there's the church. It's quite a squat building. I think the tower is 15th century and was added on, possibly the last kind of major addition to the building. I'm just going to swing around here so you get a view of the castle. Okay, so let's walk through the churchyard. This grass is so soft and springy. Swing around so you can see the tower. Okay, let's go inside. Actually, I've just thought there's one more thing I want to show you before we go inside, which is a tomb right by the porch door to a local watchmaker. So this tomb here has got a new slab on top of it, and the original tombstone is inside the church, which we'll have a look at. but this is a chap called George Routley, who died in 1802, and the epitaph is quite memorable. So we'll have a look at that when we're inside the church. So we'll have a quick look around the inside of the church. I'm not going to give you chapter and verse on every single feature, but this font here is interesting. This is actually Saxon, apparently. So, not sure it's got any sort of carvings or inscriptions on it. It's just kind of rough stone. But yeah, so that's 1,000 years old, that thing. Most of what you can see in terms of the glass, the benches, the pulpit, the screen here, the altar, the reredos, is all 20th century. So there's nothing particularly ancient within the church apart from that font. I think there's a couple of remains or some bits of sort of windows and so on that might be 13th century, but certainly all the glass is modern. One thing that I do want to show you here is actually I've got the church guide here. Let me just have a look. Yeah, so this screen, this rood screen, which is very lovely, was erected in 1904, and according to the church guide, the carving was done by the Mrs., i.e. two young ladies, well, maybe three, the Mrs. Pinwell of Ermington. So props to them for that. And these bench ends are interesting as well. So they're all different. Just going to get down here and show you one. So these were done by Herbert Reed of Exeter in the 1920s. They're all different, and they're all various saints and martyrs of the church. And you have to get really down low here, but you can see at the bottom that it says who they are. The light isn't very good. That's St Augustine of Hippo there. Let's have a look at another one. So this is St Jerome. Yeah, I recognise the hat. So I think there's over 60 of them. I'm not going to have a look at every single one. But again, beautiful carving. Let's walk down this side. So down here we've got I think the last thing that I want to show you in here, this is up on the wall here, this is George Routley's tombstone that we looked at his tomb outside. This is the watchmaker. So I'm just going to read you the epitaph. Where is it? Okay, so it says, "Here lies in horizontal position the outsized case of George Routley, watchmaker, whose abilities in that line were an honour to his profession. Integrity was the mainspring and prudence the regulator of all the actions of his life. Human, generous and liberal, his hand never stopped, till he had relieved distress, so much regulated were all his motions, that he never went wrong, except when set a-going by people who did not know his key. Even then he was easily set right again. He had the art of disposing of his time so well that his hours glided away in one continual round of pleasure and delight, till an unlucky minute put a period to his existence. He departed this life November 14th, 1802, aged 57, wound up in hopes of being taken in hand by his Maker and of being thoroughly cleaned, repaired and set going in the world to come." Now, it's a great epitaph for a watchmaker. it's actually not original. Apparently it was first published in an almanac for the year 1797, produced by an American scholar named Benjamin Banneker. But anyway, it's a great epitaph. So that is St Petroc's church. I've just noticed that in this parish, in this church guide, there's a little bit more information about Petroc, so I'm just going to read it to you, just to round out the picture. So it says, St Petroc landed with a band of followers in Cornwall at the mouth of the Camel and built his first priory at Padstow. Later he founded a monastery at Little Petherick and a third one near Bodmin. He and his monks spent much of their lives in missionary journeys in what is now Devon and Cornwall. The Cornish saints and missionaries had regular contacts with Brittany, where Petroc was held in especially high regards. Towards the end of his life, Petroc lived as a hermit near Bodmin. He died at Trerevel about 564. A renegade monk in 1177 sold the saint's relics to the Abbey of Mean in Brittany, where Petroc was much venerated. But on the express orders of Henry II, the relics were returned to Bodmin in a gold and ivory casket. Although the relics have disappeared, the casket may be seen still in the parish church there. That's interesting. So his relics survived, were brought back to the West Country and then disappeared. I wonder if they disappeared during the Reformation. I suspect so. It says here, legend says that Petroc was a Welsh prince who renounced his inheritance and while studying in Ireland experienced a call to do missionary work in Cornwall. Legend also attributes to the saint journeys to Rome, Jerusalem and India, and numerous miraculous events are associated with him. So that's St Petroc. So last thing, I'm just going to, this is the guide to the church that I picked up when I came here. It's quite useful. But there's some information on the back here about Lydford, which is quite interesting, which I haven't covered yet. So it says here that in 1650, during the English Commonwealth, the last execution was carried out at the castle. That's in 1660, at the Restoration, Lydford was described as a town now dwindled into a mean and miserable village consisting of about 20 houses. In 1802, it says Lydford was a poor, decayed village with a few ragged cottages. And in 1840, it was described as the former noted township, but now a ruined village. And apparently it was in Victorian times, when the railway came, of course, that it began to prosper again. Interestingly enough, the railway has since then gone. But anyway, it seems pretty prosperous these days. Okay, let's exit. So let's go inside the castle inn. So I hope you found that interesting. I'm sitting in the garden of the Castle Inn now. I've got a pint of Jail Ale, local beer, and I hope you enjoyed that video and found it interesting. Cheers.